All right, so Jonathan, we're having a conversation about reading the Bible and where to begin. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think one of the things is to choose a readable translation, that right up front, something that you can actually understand. And the reason that's important is because the Bible's been translated many different times from the original languages into different versions, people call them, and those versions, depending upon when they were translated, when they were published, and how they went about doing that, will determine its readability. For instance, like some of the older translations are hard to understand because it's old English, it's older language, older ideas as far as the meanings of words. And then there are some translations that are much more sensitive to modern usage of words. And there's two that I find most helpful. One's the New International Version, which is abbreviated the NIV, and one's the New Living Translation, which is abbreviated NLT. And I find that they bring the translations into modern language really nicely so you can understand. It's important.
So if somebody gets like the NLT or the NIV, where's the best place for them to start?
Yeah, if you've never read the Bible before, this is important. I mean, because the Bible is not necessarily written or laid out chronologically. Okay, so after that first part of talking about the creation account in Genesis chapter 1 at the very beginning, and there a little bit it follows chronologically into a sequence, and then it starts skipping around. So I like to recommend, and I think you agree, is just if you're new to reading the Bible, go to the table of contents, find where the New Testament begins, and then there's 4 authors, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, who all wrote accounts of Jesus' ministry and Jesus' life. And since Jesus is the main character of Christianity, since he's the main character of the Bible anyway, it just makes a lot of sense to start with him, because really the Old Testament is the backstory for his story anyway.
Right.
And so I would recommend, and like I said, I think you've had the similar experience, start there in Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John even, and go from there.
That's good. Now, some people ask the question, how much should they read when they're getting started? What would you say to that?
Oh, that's great. Because see, I think it's so important to understand that the Bible is not meant to be accomplished. It's meant to be, the truth is meant to be absorbed. It's meant, I need to understand this. I need to know what to do with this, because the ultimate goal is, how do I apply this? And I think a lot of people try to set a goal for it. I'm going to read through the Bible in 1 year, and that's not a bad thing. It's not, I guess it's a good thing, but you can get lost in that. Yeah. And then it's like, oh, I'm behind. I got to read more tomorrow because God's going to be displeased. God's upset with me because I'm behind. No, it has nothing to do with pleasing God. It's not a bad thing to do. It would be much better to read a shorter amount, absorb it, and apply it, than to read a bunch and check a box, right? Because the idea is, do I understand what I'm reading and know what to do with it? So that's so much better.
We've talked about this before. It's kind of like eating a meal, right? You can't eat all the food in one sitting.
Yeah, well, you can, but you're probably going to choke.
Right.
Even if you get it down, it may not stay there. Right. That's awesome.
So why does this conversation matter about where to begin?
Well, I would say this matters because if you don't know where to begin, you may not get started to begin with. It can be intimidating. I mean, when someone is handed a Bible, it's about that thick, well, depending on how large the print is,
right.
It's one of the longest books probably anybody's ever picked up to try to read, and some of it's old sounding, and it's ancient literature, let's just be honest.
Right.
Okay? And so if you don't know some of these things to help you get started, then it may be so intimidating that you just don't even try. So that's why it matters. If you know how to begin, it'll help you get started.